Now let's talk about generally what this new disclosure rule is in more detail. And this is kind of the signpost we're going to use throughout the beginning of the session to understand what the lobbyist bundling rules mean or how they work. Generally, the way they work is if a lobbyist registrant or lobbyist registrant PAC either forwards or is credited with raising 2 or more bundled contributions, and those bundled contributions exceed $16,000 during a covered period, then the recipient committee or that reporting committee that we just defined may be required to report that on FEC Form 3L. Okay? Real straightforward, right? Let's break that down a little bit further and define some of the terms that are here so we can better understand how these rules work. Now, the first term I'm going to define is lobbyist registrant and lobbyist registrant PAC. Now, obviously, this is important to determine if someone's a lobbyist registrant or lobbyist registrant PAC, because that will determine whether or not the first set of whether there be additional disclosure by your committee if you receive a bundled contribution. Now, how do you determine, let's first talk about, how do you determine if someone's a lobbyist registrant or lobbyist registrant PAC? Now, the rules talk about doing research on websites. There are 3 websites, and they're listed in your outline of how to determine these folks, and that is the Clerk of the House website, the Secretary of the Senate website, and then the FEC's website. So that's how a reporting committee can determine whether or not someone's a lobbyist registrant or lobbyist registrant PAC. Now, the reason is because lobbyists and registrants first have filing requirements under the Lobbyist Disclosure Act of 1995. And the LDA, as it's called, is governed by the Secretary of the Senate and the Clerk of the House. I mean, the FEC doesn't have any disclosure requirements attached to that, but the Clerk of the House and the Secretary of the Senate do. Okay, so if someone is a lobbyist, then oftentimes they are going to have to file under the LDA with the House or the Senate. Okay, so to determine if someone's a lobbyist or registrant, one way is first if they're a current registrant under the LDA and file reports with the Clerk of the House or the Secretary of the Senate, or if they're an individual who is listed on a current registration or report filed under the LDA. And what that means is registrants can often be incorporated entities, trade associations, membership organizations, and are considered registrants. And when those registrants file reports under the LDA, they have to list individual employees who do lobbying activity on their behalf. So that's how you can determine, if you go to the Clerk of the House website, look at the registrant's report, you could see a list of lobbyists there to determine if someone is in fact a lobbyist. Okay? So that is one way to check if someone's a lobbyist or registrant. Now let's go to the definition of lobbyist registrant PAC. Just looking at the definition, it looks pretty straightforward, but there's a little more details that we need to go over. Generally, any political committee that a lobbyist or registrant either established or controls is a lobbyist registrant PAC. Okay, it seems to make sense. However, what we need to do is further define established or controls. Now, this is a new definition. This is not a definition currently in the rules, and it was actually created through the lobbyist bundling rules. And in order for you to determine whether a lobbyist registrant PAC is either established by a lobbyist or is currently controlled by one. So let's go a little bit more into what it means to establish or control. Basically, a lobbyist registrant either established or controls a PAC if it must be reported with the House or the Senate under the LDA. Okay, so again, going to those LDA filings, a registrant would have to list their PAC as a lobbyist registrant PAC under the LDA. So that's one way to check. Now, if they're not able to get clear guidance from the House or the Senate and those LDA filings, the rules provide for an additional test to determine if they're a lobbyist registrant PAC. And that's by coming to the FEC's website. So you could come to the FEC's website, look up the PAC, and look to their statement of organization, the Form 1 that they filed to register the committee. And the Form 1 has been amended with these rules, was updated in March, to include a new checkbox so lobbyist registrant PACs can identify themselves as such in Form 1. Okay, and we're going to look at what that looks like in one moment. Now let's say you go to the Clerk of the House, Secretary of the Senate. You're not clear if the PAC is a lobbyist registrant PAC. You don't see anything on Form 1. There's actually an additional test that you can follow to determine whether or not a lobbyist or registrant either established or controlled the PAC. And that's if a lobbyist or registrant either had a primary role in establishing the PAC, or if a lobbyist or registrant currently directs the governance or operations of the PAC. Now, when we're talking about the establishment or the directing the governance of the PAC, there is actually a little bit of an exemption for individuals who are just providing simple legal compliance advice. And the reason is when the commission was coming up with these rules, they recognized that oftentimes PACs do consult experts to assist with either the establishment of the PAC or perhaps the day-to-day operations if they need compliance help. And if that individual providing the compliance help is also a lobbyist, that in of itself is not going to make them a lobbyist registrant PAC. However, if that individual lobbyist who is providing legal guidance has their activity rises more to the level of the primary establishment of the PAC, or they really do direct day-to-day operations, they are a voting member of the board, or they do other types of activity, it's possible that that could make them a lobbyist registrant PAC. Now, in order to determine this establishing role or the current control, it doesn't necessarily have to be formalized in some formal document in order for it to be established or controlled. It could be the informal day-to-day operations of the PAC and knowledge that this person really does help out day-to-day, even though it may not be written in the bylaws. So as such, each PAC needs to determine for itself what kind of role a lobbyist may or may not have in the PAC and whether that makes them a lobbyist registered PAC. Okay. And as I mentioned, the Form 1 was just amended recently so that these PACs could identify themselves as lobbyist registered PACs. And those PACs should have done that by March 29th of this year. So if any of you are representing FSFs who might not have done that, I'm not going to call you out, but what I would suggest doing is just amending Form 1 as soon as possible to identify yourself as a lobbyist registered PAC. Let me show you what Form 1 looks like. As I've been promising, it was amended to allow these committees to identify themselves as lobbyist registered PACs. This is what it would look like for an SSF, and in this case it's a trade association that has sponsored the SSF that's also a lobbyist registered PAC. So there's been an additional checkbox added so they can check both that they're an SSF as well as a lobbyist registered PAC. Okay. And this is how it would look for a non-connected committee, a non-connected PAC that is also a lobbyist registered PAC. Again, the two checkboxes that are listed there. Now, the last checkbox that was also added is now that committees can identify themselves as leadership PACs. Now, the reason that this was just added is because up until these rules were promulgated, we didn't have a definition of leadership PAC. Leadership PAC was definitely used in the press. It was kind of a term that folks had used informally, but it was never a definition in the regulations of leadership PAC. So with these rules, there's now a definition. So leadership PACs identify themselves here on Form 1 with this new checkbox. Okay. Any questions about Form 1? And as I mentioned, committees should have updated or amended their form by March 29th. So if you haven't done so, just do so as soon as possible. And I mentioned that lobbyist bundling information page on our website. And basically, this is a little bit of a screenshot, maybe a little blurry, but basically what it looks like. So this would be one of the places that you could come, either going straight to Form 1 to look for the checkbox, or when committees file Form 1 and indicate that they're a lobbyist registrant PAC, they're then listed on this page. Okay, so this page is maintained daily as new Form 1s come in, as Form 1s are amended.